My name is Isabel Rohr. I'm the Deputy Director of the JDC Global Archives, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, which is made possible thanks to the generous support of the Miriam Mimi Pasternak-Tobing Public Educational Programming from the JDC Archives. I'd like to start by saying a few words about the JDC Archives, as some of you might not be that familiar with us. The JDC Archives holds the records of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, also known as JDC or the Joint, since its creation over 100 years ago. Scholars, family researchers, journalists, filmmakers, and others from around the world use our collections for their research. We also offer fellowships to enable scholars to conduct research in our archives. And one of these fellowships is the Max and Cecil Storer Chessin JDC Archives Fellowship, which was established thanks to a generous gift from Sorel and Lauren Chessin. Sorel and Lauren Chessin are with us today, and I would like to thank them for that gift and for their ongoing support. In fact, Sorel Chessin will introduce our speaker today, Dr. Maria Madalina Irimia, who is the recipient of the Max and Cecil Storer Chessin JDC Archives Fellowship for 2023. After Sorel Chessin's introduction, Dr. Irimia will give her lecture, which will last about 45 minutes. Dr. Sorel Chessin will now introduce Dr. Irimia. Thank you.
Maria Madalina Irimia is a postdoctoral fellow in the Faculty of Letters in Barbados, Bologna University, Napoca, focusing on Yiddish folklore in Romania. She holds her PhD doctoral degree in history from Alexandru Cuza University, AISA, with a thesis on Jewish intellectuals in AISA in the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, Elias Moses and Wilhelm Schwartfeld. She also earned her master's degree in Jewish history from the same university, exploring the identity dilemmas of Jewish intellectuals in interwar Romania, particularly Michal Sebastian. Dr. Irimia previously held a Minerva Postdru doctoral research fellowship at the A.D. Enixol Institute of History at the Romanian Academy. Her research interests include Jewish intellectual and social life, modernization, anti-Semitism, and Jewish emigration to the Americas. She is currently a researcher at the Wilhelm Filderman Center for the Study of Jewish History in Romania. She is the recipient of the 2023 Max and Cecil Storer Chessin JDC Archives Fellowship. The title of her lecture today is Wilhelm Filderman, JDC's representative in Romania from 1920 to 1947. Dr. Irimia will now start her lecture.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. First, I want to thank Mr. Sorel Chessin for giving me the opportunity to be a fellow at the AGDC Archive and to research this topic, which I hope to publish in an article very soon. Also, I would like to thank Isabel and the AGDC staff for supporting me during my research and for organizing this webinar. Today, I'm going to present a lecture about Wilhelm Filderman and his capacity as president of the JDC in Romania. He is considered the most important leader of Romanian Jewry. He held various leadership positions within the community, but also he was a representative for international Jewish organizations, like in the present case, the JDC, a position he held for 27 years. My lecturer will examine Wilhelm Filderman's activity as president of Joint Romania. Another objective of this research is to outline an answer as to what extent the Joint was familiar with the situation of the Jews in Romania and with the Holocaust. To carry out this research, I used sources from the archives records of the New York, Istanbul, and Geneva office of the American Joint Distribution Committee, the archive of the Center for the Study of the Jewish History in Romania, both volumes of Wilhelm Filderman's memoirs and diaries, as well as articles from the newspaper Curierul Israelit, the Israelite Courier. Who was Wilhelm Filderman? Wilhelm Filderman was born in Bucharest on 12 September 1882 into the family of a Jewish printer. During his secondary studies, he was a classmate of the future Marshal Ion Antonescu. He later attended law school at the Sorbonne in Paris, where he received a doctorate in law. He returned to Romania, where, unable to practice as a lawyer, he taught briefly at the Cultura Jewish High School in Bucharest. After the introduction of a special law, Filderman received Romanian citizenship in 1912. During the First World War, he fought as an officer in the Romanian army, for which he was decorated with military orders. In 1919, he took part of the Committee of Jewish Delegations, which worked to obtain rights for Jews in Eastern Europe. He made key contributions to the drafting of the Romanian Minority Rights Treaty, for which he was praised by Louis Marshall, Julian Mack, and the Rabbi Dr. Stephen Wise. In 1923, he was officially elected president of Union of Romanian Jews, and from 1921 to 1941, he served as president of the Union of Jewish Communities in Romania. Filderman played a major role in organizing the resistance and survival of the Romanian Jews in the years of the Holocaust. On 30 May 1943, he was deported to Transnistria by the Antonescu regime, being released after 3 months under public pressure. After the regime's fall, Filderman briefly resumed his position as a leader of Romanian Jewry. He became a target of communist regime for his activities and his various positions, and was arrested in 1944. Harassed, slandered, and threatened, Filderman decided to leave the country in 1948, crossing clandestinely into Hungary alongside his wife. He died in Paris in May 1963. The archive of documents he managed to smuggle out of the country is now held at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. Now I will present a resume of the JDC activity in Romania at its beginnings. The JDC was founded in November 1914 to provide aid to disadvantaged Jews in Central and Eastern Europe during the First World War. Among the founding members of the JDC were Louis Marshall, Jacob Schiff, Felix Warburg, Cyrus Adler, and Louis Brandeis. From 1916 to 1918, Romanian institutions received $150,000 from the Joint. These sums were sent by a committee under the leadership of the Joint Netherlands branch. In his memoirs, Filderman notes that the money was used to establish much-needed canteens and clinics at the time when the population was struggling with typhoid fever and epidemic typhus. In May 1919, a delegation led by James Becker, the first regional director, came to Romania to discuss ways to assist the Jewish population. The Joint Romanian section was established on 29 May 1919 under the presidency of the well-known Jewish philanthropist and activist Adolf Solomon. James Becker's mission ended in March 1920, at which point he was succeeded by Alexander Landesco, an American Jew of Romanian origin. His plan was aimed at the following activities: the provision of public assistance, the organization of a special section for the care of war widows and orphans, the organization of credit cooperatives, and economic assistance. In June 1920, Wilhelm Filderman was unanimously elected president of JDC Romania following the death of Adolf Solomon. In a report addressed from 1919 addressed to the Joint in his capacity as president of Union of Native Jews, Filderman analyzed the political and economic situation of the Jews in Romania, emphasizing their exclusions from all fields of human activity. I quote, "These restrictions, together with specific prohibitions against living in villages, have compelled the concentration of the Jews in the city and in a very limited number of occupation. These are the causes for the misery in which crushes 65% of the former population, which still lives in Romania, nearly 20% having emigrated to various countries, particularly to America." End of quote. On 27 July 1920, Filderman proposed his project to the Central Committee of the Division of the Joint, aimed at two objectives: social assistance and professional rehabilitation. Considering these objectives, Filderman proposed the training of youth in various trades and the establishment of offices to deal with work placements. Meanwhile, Filderman researched the possibility of establishing a network of credit cooperatives that would support the economic recovery of the Jewish population. Thus, in 1920, with the support of the Joint, the United Cooperatives were established in Bucharest, situated within the larger context of the 1920s, in which the National Bank and other Romanian economic institutions refused contact with the Jewish clientele. 4 years later, in the midst of the economic crisis, the Cooperative Credit Bank was established with branches throughout the country. Filderman also played an important role in the construction of the new Caritas Maternity Hospital. In 1920, he obtained a sum of 1.3 million lei from the Joint in order to buy a plot of land on Traian Street, where the hospital was located, intended to care for both Jews and non-Jews. The hospital was inaugurated 12 years later, at which Filderman gave a speech in the presence of King Carol II and numerous officials. In June 1921, steps were taken to close the Joint branches in Romania and to withdraw its delegates, following the decision taken at the November 1920 Conference of the Regional Directors in Vienna, when JDC decided to limit its subsidies for Europe. Nevertheless, the Joint's activity did not come to a halt. One important moment in the history of collaboration with the Joint was Filderman's action to rescue the Russian and Ukrainian Jews refugees from Romanian territory. Romania allowed the temporary residence of Ukrainian Jewish refugees, fleeing from Bolshevik attacks, political violence, and persecution, with the government assigning management of the situation to Wilhelm Filderman as president of the Union of Native Jews. On 5 January 1921, Filderman was elected chairman at the Committee for the Support of Refugees and thus began relief work, appealing to branches of the Joint Distribution Committee from every city. He accordingly launched an invitation to join the humanitarian work through fundraising. By 1925, the refugee relief campaign was largely resolved. Wilhelm Filderman wrote in his memoirs that, through constant daily pressure, by 1925, we had managed to evacuate almost all the refugees from Romania. Filderman's mission ended after obtaining passports allowing the emigration to the other countries for the 50,000 Jewish refugees who had come to Romania, and for about 3,000 of them, the approval to stay in Romania. Now I will present the context of some of the anti-Semitic violence episodes that happened in Romania in the interwar period, and how they are reflected in the correspondence with of Filderman with the JDC. Towards the end of the 1920s, anti-Semitic violence was present throughout the country. These events are described by Filderman in his journal, where he speaks of an atmosphere of continuous pogrom in that era. In Oradea, following a student congress in 1927, delegates vandalized the city's predominantly Jewish commercial center, then boarded trains from which they threw out Jewish passengers. The following year, a bomb was planted at the synagogue in Arad. But the most significant moment of anti-Semitic violence occurred in Borsha, where in 1930 the entire Jewish quarter was burned down and destroyed. An echo of these events can also be found in the correspondence of the JDC, which organized a fundraiser of $20,000 for the reconstruction of Borsha Jewish quarter. Wilhelm Filderman was directly involved in collecting aid for the reconstruction of the destroyed Borsha neighborhood, launching an appeal to the Jews of Romania to come to the aid of the victims. Filderman informed the Joint about recent anti-Semitic incidents through a letter dated 19 May 1930, in which he stated that the situation in the country was extremely serious and that the future for the Jews of Romania looked increasingly bleak, within a larger context in which Professor of Law Alexandru Cecuza, which was the head of Romania's anti-Semitic party, had been elected to the parliament with 11,000 votes. Filderman denounced the passivity of the Romanian government, which allowed the operation of anti-Semitic organization in the country, despite the protests from the universities. The political and economic situation of Romania was of interest to the Joint, a fact that emerges from a confidential report made by Boris Smolar in 1937, in which he mentions the campaign by Valer Pop, Romania's Minister of Industry and Trade, and the notorious anti-Semite, to force large Jewish enterprises to replace their Jewish staff with Romanians. Across the board, Smolar asserted, government policies paralyze Jewish commerce, doing anything in its power to encourage non-Jewish enterprises by granting them easy credits and special import permits, while Jews were restricted from importing raw materials and goods from abroad. Smolar indicated that, I quote, "It will be an illusion to expect the situation of Romanian Jews to change for better. Massacre and plunder are possibilities under the existing violent anti-Semitic propaganda in Romania." End of quote. Smolar's prediction was not wrong. In Romania, the internal situation deteriorated day by day, and Filderman continually warned its political leaders of the danger posed by Corneliu Zelea Codreanu legionary movement. Following the ascension of the Goga-Cuza government on 21 January 1938, a revision to Romanian citizenship law was proclaimed, which in effect cancelled some of the rights put in place through the Paris Treaty and the Constitution of 1923. While abroad, Filderman notified International Jewish Organization about the abusive law decree. In January 1938, Filderman met Josef Hyman of the Joint and other representatives of international organizations to discuss the fate of the Romanian Jews. Joint officials expressed worry over the new government's administrative measures against Romania's Jewish minority, which was affecting their daily life. Jewish officials were fired, state aid from Jewish institutions was withdrawn, Jewish commercial firms declared bankruptcy. In 1939, however, the Joint and other international Jewish organizations were banned from operating in Romania, and all of their entire committees were dismantled. Although the joint activity in Romania was no longer legal, it continued its aid and reconstruction programs through Jewish aid organization and credit cooperatives. In this part of my presentation, I will speak about the difficult task Filderman had as president of the JDC during the Holocaust. In the years 1940-1941, the activity of community institution was coordinated by the Federation of Union of Jewish Communities, headed by Wilhelm Filderman. He played a historic role in the fight for the defense of the Jews against measures imposed by the Ion Antonescu regime. In the midst of the struggle for power between Ion Antonescu and the legionaries, the Bucharest pogrom took place on 21 January 1941, resulting in the killing of approximately 125 Jews and the destruction of 1,500 businesses and homes in the Jewish quarter. The event was covered by the American media. 9 months later, the Record magazine of the United Romanian Jews of America published a front-page article illustrated with photographs taken during the investigation of the Bucharest pogrom. Joint officials, however, had known about the events much earlier. A letter dated 12 February 1941 contained information about the JDC in Romania under the conditions established by the Antonescu regime, as well as about recent events and ways in which the Joint might intervene in favor of the victims of the legionary terror. On 22 June 1941, Romania entered the Second World War, with Antonescu giving the order to fight for the liberation of Bessarabia from Soviet occupation. Shortly after attack against the Soviet Union on 29 June, several thousand Jews in Iași were arrested and taken to the police headquarters, where they were massacred. 4,500 Jews, survivors of the massacre, were taken to the train station and boarded onto death trains with the destination Poduiloae Călărași. Over 60% of them died of suffocation. Only 1,817 survived the trains, the victims being buried in mass graves. At the end of August 1941, the deportation of Jews from Bessarabia to camps and ghettos began. The Jews of southern Bucovina suffered the same fate. Orders to deport Jews from Dorohoi, Câmpulung, Suceava, and Rădăuți to camps to Transnistria followed. Under these conditions, organizing the fight for survival was a vital issue for Wilhelm Filderman. He reacted immediately, sending countless petitions to Marshal Ion Antonescu, in which he emphasized the illegal and inhumane nature of the deportation. Filderman's petition also reached the US Ambassador Franklin Mott Gunter, who informed his superiors of anti-Jewish persecutions in Romania. In order to stop Wilhelm Filderman's activity at the head of the Federation of Jewish Communities, Antonescu dissolved the organization on 16 December 1941 by decree law. It was replaced with Central Jewish Office, Centrala Evreilor, an organizational structure for the Jewish community that operated in accordance with provisions set by Antonescu government. On 30 May 1943, as means of intimidating Filderman, he was deported to Transnistria, only returning after 3 months following diplomatic interventions, at which point he resumed his war of petitions with Ion Antonescu with the goal of rescuing Romanian Jews. Now I will present how the JDC operated in Romania, considering its activities were illegal since 1939. At the beginning of the war, securing financial support for Romanian Jews was an increasingly difficult task for the Joint. The JDC was represented by Bertrand Jakobson, who, beginning in June 1941, moved his residence to Bucharest until the entry of the United States into the war. From then onwards, Romania was declared an enemy nation, and any contact with American institutions was cut. Funding was obtained primarily from the JDC investments in credit cooperatives, which were liquidated by the Romanian government in 1941. The rest of the cooperatives were dissolved and their funds were transferred toward the JDC activities. Another way in which the JDC continued its operation was through the Autonomous Aid Commission, which was established following the Bucharest pogrom on 24 January 1941 through the initiative of Filderman. A relief commission was established, being tasked with the mission of recording victims and damages, as well as collecting funds and distributing aid. The commission did not limit itself to this type of assistance work. It also had an essential role in organizing work to help victims of the massacres in Iași, Bessarabia, and Bukovina, as well as deportees to Transnistria and those in forced labor. Filderman requested permission to send aid to deportees to Transnistria as early as October 1941, at which point he wrote to Vice President of the Council of Ministers, Mihai Antonescu, which he approved in December 1941. Maintaining contact with the Joint was still forbidden, although Filderman sent an address to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in October 1941, asking for approval for the entry of joint delegates Bertrand Jakobson and Joseph Blum into the country, in order to discuss possibilities and methods towards the immigration of the Jewish population from Romania. Through reports compiled by the Siguranță, Romania's secret police, it is clear that Bertrand Jakobson was under observation, as was Filderman. Thus, the meeting of the Joint Committee took place clandestinely in Filderman's home. By February 1942, sending relief to Transnistria through the Autonomous Aid Commission was not enough. So Filderman attempted to get approval for the movement of Jewish representatives to Transnistria as well. Beginning in October 1942, Wilhelm Fischer, the representative of World Jewish Congress for Romania, managed to establish contact with Jewish representatives abroad, in particular in Switzerland with Sally Meyer, the Swiss Jewish leader and representative of the JDC in Europe. The Joint provided him with funds that could not be brought into the country, so Fischer borrowed sums of money from wealthy contacts, which would be returned after the war. Fischer had at hand a fund of 28 million lei, half of which was sent through special couriers to help the Jews in Transnistria through the Aid Commission. While Filderman was interned in Transnistria, the journalist Hans Vetti, a representative of the World Jewish Congress, came to Romania, meeting with Wilhelm Fischer and passing him a letter from Sally Meyer. Written in a conspirational language, the letter contained indication and promises towards a massive foreign aid. Vetti made the Romania-Switzerland journey several times, reporting on the political, economic, and military situation within the country, as well as the needs of the Jewish population, and bringing information to the country that facilitated the receipt of funding. In the first half of 1943, Meyer sent $35,000 through the Relief Committee for the war-stricken Jewish population followed by transfers made through the Red Cross. In May 1943, the Red Cross delegation arrived in Bucharest with a transfer of $60,000 on behalf of Meyer. In November 1943, Meyer received an expenditure report from Filderman. About $670,000 had been spent in 1943, almost entirely on Transnistria. The JDC continued to maintain contact in Romania through Wilhelm Fischer, except in cases when Filderman personally corresponded with Sally Meyer. In the summer of 1943, the World Jewish Congress suggested a grand plan to raise $10 million to buy food from Turkey, to send to the ghettos and camps in Transnistria. Food aid was expected to reach thousands of Jews in Transnistria by the first weeks of 1944. At the beginning of 1944, the director of the Special Assistance Division of International Committee of the Red Cross wrote to Sally Meyer regarding the purchase and distribution of clothing to the Jews in Transnistria, using sums that Joint had transferred to Romania through the Red Cross in October 1943. Transactions of this kind had multiplied in the summer of 1944, and the money went directly to Filderman. Following the changes of 23 August 1944, the years of anti-Jewish persecution in Romania came to an end. Filderman addressed the Joint, presenting the difficult situation in which the Jews of Romania found themselves, given the fact that the Romanian state refused to grant them basic reparation for material and human losses suffered under the Antonescu regime. On 31 December 1944, the Central Assistance Committee of the JDC, chaired by Filderman, announced that it had decided in agreement with the International Committee of the Red Cross to provide recovery support for Jews repatriated from Transnistria, including those in prison and political camps, as well as widows and orphans of the Iași pogrom, beginning of January of the following year. Administration of the funds fell on Filderman, not only because he was president of Central Committee of Joint in Romania, but also because he was valued by the American organization as a trusted figure. It is estimated that by the end of July 1945, Filderman had distributed 17 million Swiss francs and $50,000. By the end of 1945, the Joint had supported the Jews of Romania through a sum of approximately $6.5 million. Even in the years after 1945, the need for the Joint support did not dwindle. Beginning in January 1946, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs authorized the Joint to establish a permanent office in Romania, represented by Bertrand Jacobson, who implemented the aid program for both repatriated and impoverished Jews, independent of the International Red Cross. This is the last part of my presentation, which focuses on Filderman's refusal to cooperate with the communist regime, which actually determined his departure in 1948. After 23 August 1944, Filderman categorically refused the membership of the Union of Romanian Jews and the Zionist organization in the new body, the Jewish Democratic Committee, formed by the Communist Party to represent the country's Jewry in an official capacity. Because he was in permanent disagreement with the policy pursued by the Jewish Democratic Committee, attacks against him multiplied. Filderman was accused of betraying the interests of the country and of being an agent of imperialists due to his connections with the Joint. Even though Filderman was responsible for obtaining a loan worth $1 million to the Romanian government, being, in his own words, the first line of credit that Romania received from the United States following the end of the war, the public defamation of Filderman as an agent of American imperialism continued. His removal from his position as president of the Joint soon followed. Jewish Democratic Committee representative took the leadership of the organization under the new motto of the national solidarity, meaning that joint funds would be used not only to help impoverished Jews, but also Christian Romanians. Growing disagreement with the policies of the new regime led Filderman to resign from all public positions, including that of the Joint President, in the summer of 1947, and to leave the country the next year. On 18 February 1949, the Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Romania decided to dissolve all joint structures in Romania by 1st March 1949 and to transfer its assets to the Federation of the Union of Jewish Communities. This was only temporary, as in April 1949, these assets were taken over by the state. And here are some conclusions of this research. Wilhelm Filderman was a skilled representative of the Romanian Jewry, both in relation to the Romanian authorities and internationally, playing a key role in pivotal moments in the history of the Jews in Romania. He was definitely the most influential Romanian Jewish leader, and through each of his leadership positions, Filderman managed to represent the interests and needs of Romanian Jews in tandem with international Jewish organizations, including, as in the present case, with the Joint Distribution Committee. With Filderman's support, joint officials were able to undertake an extensive program of support and humanitarian action for the Jews of Romania over the course of 27 years, and to ensure the continuity of Jewish life during its most difficult periods, namely the First World War and its consequences, the Great Depression, the rise of anti-Semitism, the outbreak of the Second World War and the Holocaust, and finally the transition to the communist regime. Throughout this entire period, the undivided activity of the American organization in Romania was realized thanks to the leadership skills of Filderman, who perfected the JDC in Romania in both Jewish leadership and in its organizational structure. Filderman's relations with the Joint continued even after his exile in Paris, where he carried correspondence with his old collaborators of the JDC, despite not holding any representative functions. Documents of the JDC, dating from 1950, shows that he had begun to formulate a plan to assist Jews from Romania seeking to make Aliyah in Eretz Israel.
Thank you, Maria, for a very interesting lecture. Thank you to our participants for joining us today. I also want to thank the Miriam Mimi Pasternak Tobin Public Educational Programmings from the JDC Archives to make this program possible. And I want to thank, of course, Sorel Chassin for endowing this fellowship and for introducing Maria. Our next program will take place on November 13. Abra Cohen and Saba Mitzel will give a lecture entitled Lens on Poland, Analyzing JDC Interwar Relief Work Through Mixed Media. Invitations will be sent out next week. You will also be able to sign via our Facebook page. Please sign for our e-newsletter if you're interested in getting invitations to our future programs. Thank you, everyone.